everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences.
Get on with it.
So today I'm taking a very quick look at Goblin Vaults. Now this is another game from Thunderworks Games, thanks for the review, Gabby. And honestly, if I had just looked at this on a shelf, I would have passed it right on by for several reasons. Firstly, not the most enticing box cover, you've got to admit. Secondly, it's called Goblin Vaults. Okay, whatever. A role-player tale. This is this thing about having to be in the role-player universe. I mean, the role-player universe is basically just D&D. It's generic fantasy, okay? Not everything has to be in that universe. The theme doesn't really matter in this game. The idea of this is that you are building up a little treasure trove for yourself, a vault, per se. There are different suits of cards, all numbered from 1 to 10, with faction icons at the top, as well as tier icons. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. What you're essentially doing is you're trying to build up chambers, which are basically columns of cards. So you have up to 4 chambers in front of you, and then with these chambers you'll have up to 3 cards within them. And the idea is not only are you trying to find cards that match your faction icon, basically your player color, but you also want to try to get cards in the right tiers per their icon. So if something is a tier 3 card, you want it in the tier 3 row. But then there's also scoring cards, which are revealed before the start of the game. 2 specific to suits, 1 specific to just the whole game, basically. And these will score you in various different ways. Like, for example, take the green suit. Score each tier with the leftmost and rightmost cards are green. You know, stuff like that. You know, your lowest card must be a skull. Sorry, your skull must be the lowest card. Your crown must be the highest card. And there's easy and hard versions of them. So there's quite a decent amount of variety in the goals, I will say. But that alone doesn't sound that enticing. Well, here's the slightly clever bit. The idea is that you are bidding on 3 cards. So 1, 2, 3. This is what they call the block, and we'll get onto these names a little bit later. And there's also a warden card. The warden card is essentially what tells you what the trump suit is. Everybody has a hand of about 10 cards before they start the game, and you decide which one of these 3 cards I want to get into my vault. So you decide, right, you know what, I'm going to use one of my cards to bid, and I bid 5 for, let's find something of a different colour. Let's bid 6. 6 green for this card here. It's not the trump suit, according to this. The trump suit is, let's pick another one there, crowns. And so this is just a 6. I place my faction marker on it, and there I go. And then other players decide whether they want to bid for a different card, beat my bid, or underbid. If you beat my bid, you place a card that's higher. So for example, somebody could literally just put out an 8. There you go, red puts out an 8 and is beating me. But then you could also instead place out a lower card. So deliberately underbid. You know what, I'm just going to place a 3. A 3 to your 6 and underbid. Well, why would you do that? Because if you win the card, you get the card and it goes in your vault, and the one you bid with replaces it. But if you underbid, the card you bid with goes into your vault. So you're almost thinking, well, you know what, I don't like what's in the middle row. I decide what I want from my hand. And so there's some really deceptively clever aspects to this game in terms of the card play. Now, I hope that was semi-clear from the explanation I just gave, because one thing about this game is you need a good teacher. The first issue that I had with it was the rulebook is only a small rulebook. It's not the clearest rulebook in the world, though. There's some stuff that is quite ambiguous here in terms of how it works. There's 1 or 2 aspects that aren't even explained in that book. Certain iconography is not explained. There's an icon on here that every time it says for each chamber, there's an icon with 3 cards and an arrow on it. There is nowhere in the rulebook where that icon is described. And also, a lot of these goals say score each chamber, but it doesn't say whether the chamber has to be full of 3 cards or can have any number of cards. Certain things like this are missing from the rulebook, and yes, if you go onto Board Game Geek, they have been answered, so you can find answers to these questions, but they should have been in the rulebook, and it's not like it's a big complex game. You should have been able to catch this before it went out to print. But on top of that, it's not the most intuitive game either, because of everything being called a name, because of it being in the role-player universe. I mean, a column is called a chamber. A row is called a tier. The 3 cards in the middle are called the block. The trump card is called the warden card. Now, I mean, the warden card's not too bad, but having to refer to everything by tiers, chambers, and the block is just such a weird, phrase to use for it. It does throw people off. And sadly, the player reference cards don't exactly help, because the final scoring is pretty straightforward, so you can easily see what that is. But the order of play, this text-heavy order of play on the back, is not very clear either, because it's like, add 1 gear to the card. Well, what card? Sole bidder adds the card to their vault, collects any gears in it, and moves their bid to the block. Seriously, if you read that out loud to yourself, you'd be thinking, what the hell are you on about? It really is kind of a bit, like, a little bit just... The idea of being in this universe and using these phrases and stuff like that, they could have easily just said row and column, because frankly, the theme means nothing in this game. This is a card game through and through. Forget the theme, just call it rows and columns, because frankly, that's as much as I'm going to use. But I'm not going to take a Sharpie to these and turn them into row and columns, or I've got to explain it by block, chamber, and tier. And it's just, it throws a few people off. The game scales from 1 to 5 players, and normally I'm like, oh my god, no, 5 players, you gotta be kidding. Surprisingly, I actually quite like this with more players. 3 players is fine, but you can sometimes have a situation where not a great deal is happening with the cards in the middle. In 2 players, that is just like compounded. You have a separate deck of cards for Glavrun or whatever it is, the AI, and he just chucks a random bid out each turn. But a lot of the times in 2 players, you'll find yourself just bidding on different cards to each other, so the whole concept of underbidding rarely happens, and it's just not that interesting. When you put 4 or 5 players in though, because the block doesn't scale, you're still bidding over 3 cards. So 5 players particularly trying to get on 3 cards mean that there's a lot of outbidding, there's a lot of underbidding. There's certainly not a situation where it's going to be a clean round, particularly with 5. So that creates a much more interesting game, and for once I actually feel that this is something that is better with more players, and I don't say that very often. The solo mode is pretty basic, frankly. It's essentially the same as the 2-player version, except you have this Glavrun as a guy you have to beat, and pretty much the same deal. You deal some cards to his deck, he flips a card each time, and there's a certain rule as to where it will go, and you just basically bid or outbid him based on that. I mean, it's simple, although there are, again, some rules that aren't the clearest in there, but... Again, I don't want to play just me versus him. I want to play this with 4 or 5 players, and so I don't think that this is a game that you play by yourself or with one other. You buy this as a semi-filler. I mean, 45 minutes is not the shortest game in the world, and it can take longer with AP players, but certainly you're talking a 45-minute to a possibly 60-minute game, and you don't want to be kind of like dragging its heels or anything like that. It's just one that I think, 60 minutes with 2 of you, there are much better games that you can play. But 4 or 5, it's pretty sweet. The whole faction icon thing, though, seems like a throwaway scoring. And it's not particularly fair, because you have 10 cards in the game, and there's only a basic way to draw more cards, the warden action. One aspect I do like, well, we'll get onto that later, but you can't shift stuff around in your vault easily, and you're trying to get your icon on the cards in your vault, but you might have a hand of cards that none of them have got your faction icon on them. So you have to rely on the other players or what's in the block to get any faction icons. But you might really desperately need certain cards, and if you faff around trying to get 2 points for a faction icon, you're losing out on so much other stuff. But it seems a little unfair that somebody else could have drawn a bunch of their icons in their hand, and then if they just underbid and can utilize those cards, they're getting bonus points for doing diddly squat. I don't see any other reviewer mention this, and I'm kind of curious as to why. Now I've ragged on a few aspects here, but there is definitely some positives to this game. I actually really like the gameplay itself. That's definitely the highlight here. Theme, whatever. Some ambiguities with the rulebook, yep, that is a fair point, and certainly the scoring is a little bit up in there. But I like the gameplay. I like this whole idea of having to bid for either the card in the middle or choose one from your hand. The fact that you might want to underbid at times or outbid someone or go for a specific card, being tailored by the goals, being tailored by where it's going to sit in your vault, but also by what card you play for the warden action. If you play a card that matches the warden card for its faction icon, you get to either draw and discard and redraw a card, or move something in your vault which can be like paramount to making it score more. So there's a lot of tactical elements to what you do in each round, even though you're only bidding once in the round and then you resolve everything. But I like the way that you don't get a big selection of cards. It's kind of Res Arcana-ish in that respect. Now, I'm not a big fan of Res Arcana because it's pretty generic what you do, but I do like the fact that you pretty much have 8 cards and that's it for the entire game. Here, you've got 10 cards, and for the most part, apart from the occasional discard and redraw, that's pretty much it that you have for the rest of the game. So your options are dwindling as you go through, and you're really having to think slightly ahead, but then also think, well, I could outbid them with that, but I'd kind of like to get that card in my vault. So maybe I should underbid, but I can't underbid it because it's the trump card right now. Or maybe I could switch the warden card later and do that. A lot of these decisions come through as you play, and it's not brain-burny, but I think they're quite cool. And I do get a lot of enjoyment out of doing it. It's not exactly trick-taking, it's not exactly auctions, but it kind of combines the best elements of a lot of these. And the whole warden card aspect kind of reminds me a little bit of Fox on the Forest. You know that decree card you have in the middle with the trump suit, and players at certain times can swap it in and out? Well, here, when the first player marker moves around, that player gets to decide whether to swap the warden card with one in the middle, and that can change things up as well. Problem with the first player marker is, though, it just goes round after each turn. There is no other way to win the marker. So in a 9-round game, it moves. Some people are going to go first more than others, and it's not fair in that regard. There needed to be something in here that meant that you could purposely win the first player marker and get control of what to do with the warden card, because then it would give people the incentive to go after the first player marker. But just to have it move around generically, I'm kind of having to think, right, hang on, I've got 5 of us here, so each of us is going first once, but then somebody is not going first for a second time. That probably should be me, so maybe I should be going last then in the round. It's like having to do that before a game is just kind of annoying. Now, as much as I talk about the player scaling, there's not a great deal more interaction either. You don't interact with other people's vaults, and yeah, there's more contention for the middle, but you don't really have time to be able to see what everybody's got in their vault and guess which cards they're going to go after. You might be able to hazard a guess that somebody might really like a card, but then they might have something better in their hand that they're going to underbid for. You have no idea what the other players are going to do, and so while you're bidding on these cards, it doesn't feel like an epic showdown or anything like that. You don't get a lot of surprise moments, right? I'm going to bid there, and then somebody goes bid there, and they go, ooh! It's like, that doesn't really happen. And the fact that somebody outbids you could just be a thing that happens, and you have to go, oh, you've done that. Okay, right, fine, I'll just have to think of something else next round, because you don't get a chance to react to what they're doing. You kind of have to put a card down and decide for yourself whether you're happy to be underbidded or not, and so base your decision in that way. But it does mean that the game proceeds quite quietly. It's not like a particularly talkative game. You're not necessarily interacting on many levels here. You're just doing your own thing with your vault, and you're not too interested in what other people are doing with theirs. You're just having fun with the card play itself, and the card play is fun. But it's kind of weird, because you want more players for the contention in the middle, but then having more players doesn't give you as much interaction as it should do with more players, if that kind of makes sense. It's a little weird. So I'm giving Goblin Vaults a 7 out of 10. It's a good game, and I was tempted to give this an 8 because I really do like the card play system in this. A lot of this is riding on that. But I can't overlook the genericness of the theme, box title, and everything like that. The fact that it has to use these weird terms to describe things that should have been just done with generic, simple terms to make it easier to play, and with the rulebook ambiguities and omissions in places, which is kind of unforgivable really when you have a rulebook this small in a game this reasonably simple. It made it a bit more trickier to learn and a bit more fiddlier to teach than it should have been. But you do get some, fairly basic cards. The artwork is fine, it does the job. Good variety of goals. I do wish that this was a little bit more interesting with the first player marker, and I wish that maybe there was a bit more interaction with having more players at the table. But then because of the player scaling issues, you do need to have more players rather than less. So it's got some issues where I feel like a little bit more development time was needed. But the card play is still solid. I'm kind of more online with... I like this more than Tom Bassel did when he reviewed it, but I am seeing some reviews go up on Board Game Geek particularly that are like, this is one of the best games ever, why is this so amazing? It's just like, maybe curb your expectations down a little bit there, maybe not quite so gushing over everything. There are some legit flaws in this game that have to be addressed, but I still enjoy it, and I'll probably hang on to this one for a little while because I don't have many fillers or many short games that I want to bring out with 5 players, and to have this as a good option for 5 players means that it does have a place on my shelf if I can fit it in somewhere. Because, yeah, 5-player games are quite a rarity in terms of good ones, and so I'll take even a 7 out of 10 in that regard. It's good, few flaws stop it from being great, but it's still worth a checking out. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please remember to thumb it up on YouTube, but also thumb it up on Board Game Geek and get it shared on social media. Let's see if we can get it in the hot reviews section of Board Game Geek. That would be great. Really, please do get those thumbs up there. It really helps to make the reviews stand out in the public eye. But if you want to comment on anything to do with the role player universe or anything down here, then by all means get your comments down below and I'll be glad to answer them when I can. Until next time, you can check out more content on the show, including the top 10 two-player games lists that I've been doing, casual, next step, and advanced games. All 3 of them are now done. They are set in stone, 30 different games. By all means, check out those videos and see if there's anything that takes your fancy. So take care, and remember as always, regardless of whether you want to stick a crown or a book or a lantern or whatever skull in your vault, it's still only a game. Bye for now, everyone.